Today, I'm speaking with Jacob, who recently graduated from Tech Sales Ascension and broke in as an SDR. Unique to this conversation is the fact that Jacob actually took CourseCareers and Tech Sales Ascension, and he breaks down his experience on both platforms. But additionally, whether you're looking at a course, whether you're looking to YouTube to just get more information and prepare yourself, Jacob admittedly did experience a lot of rejection early on when applying to companies, and he's got some really great insights I know you're gonna get a lot of value out of.
Would love to kick it over to you, maybe talking through, your experience, set the stage for us, and also kind of your experiences going through various boot camps. And a huge question, but where you ended now, right? So feel free to kick it off and we'll take it from there.
Sure, Eric. Well, happy to be here. Nice to see you again, Chris. Happy to talk to you both. Yeah, definitely a good question. So my background, I've done a variety of different things. I've always been curious about tech sales, but because I didn't know how to code, I thought that I wasn't eligible to join. I don't know where this belief came from. It seems to be semi-prevalent in the industry, but that's kind of what started. I accepted a sales position working at Sleep Number, and I noticed that the volume for inbound was maybe not enough to sustain me. And so I looked on YouTube how to cold call. One of the first videos that popped up was Trent Dressel, and that is how I discovered CourseCareers.
So from there, it sounds like you kind of been in and around sales. You ultimately decide to invest in CourseCareers and obviously end up in Tech Sales Ascension as well. Maybe take us through that experience, and I'll leave it open-ended for your feedback. But how was the experience in CourseCareers? How was the experience in Tech Sales Ascension? And I'm sure we'll have questions throughout.
My experience at CourseCareers was good. Trent made a good course. It was overall a comprehensive course designed to train one from the ground up to be an SDR. And that was how I would answer that question in interviews, exactly like that. And I found that CourseCareers was good. As time went on and I was applying, I felt that in some ways I was a little unprepared. And to me, I have a little bit of an analytical mind. I can be rather technical. So I wanted something a little bit more in depth. And that is what made me look into a second tech sales course. Eric, I've told you this before, but for the audience, I had actually seen some of Eric's videos before, and I found great value in them. Eric is clearly more technical, and that is what I was drawn to. So I don't remember the exact point that I learned about Tech Sales Ascension, but it was likely in one of your YouTube videos that I was watching, and it said something like, hey, if you guys want more detail, we have a tech sales bootcamp. And that's what I did. I looked at it, and it was exactly what I was looking for, something more in depth and a little bit more alive. CourseCareers is good, but it is a static program. There is a Discord group. I didn't find a lot of value in that because it's just a lot of people like me, and you can get some value bouncing ideas off of each other. But I really wanted something directly with Trent, and that wasn't available. And so that's kind of one of the main differences that I noticed with Tech Sales Ascension is not only is your course in a lot of ways, in every category, you guys go into further detail. It's also a little bit more put together, like well put together, and we have access to you guys. So those are some of the main differences that I was really drawn to.
Yeah, I'm curious too, Jacob. So you started out with CourseCareers, and then you eventually bought into Tech Sales Ascension. I'm curious, like what moment in time, made you kind of invest into Tech Sales Ascension, or what was it that made you look elsewhere?
Yeah, for sure. I started applying for jobs before I had even taken the CourseCareers final exam. And there were a few points that I got to final rounds and I could have landed the position, but I blew it in various ways. And so after a few of those experiences and not really having anyone to turn to and request feedback on and practice with and things of that nature, I took the CourseCareers final exam and didn't feel like that gave me an edge in any way. I had already seen a lot of other students posting on LinkedIn, and to me, it just felt like we were all becoming kind of carbon copies of each other and nothing was helping us stand out, which is what I felt like the certificate was supposed to do. But it seemed like with a passing score of 70%, it just seemed like it didn't do anything for me. And it was kind of at that point, after applying to a number of other jobs, that I sought something a little bit more in depth to help me prepare a little bit more. And that's where I stumbled upon Tech Sales Ascension, because I had seen some of Eric's videos in the past.
I'm curious too, so like inside of Tech Sales Ascension, were there any modules or, categories that helped you more than others, perhaps in CourseCareers? Like, was there anything in particular that drew you in a little bit more?
The way you guys structured the interviews, from the recruiter interview to the hiring manager interview to like the final panel interview, things like that, it really, even though that was clearly designed for a more technical role, it helped me a lot to get more live practice. The CourseCareers interview examples, while I thought were good, they weren't as structured as such. And in some ways I felt like, because at that point in time, I had gone through a number of interviews, and the example interviews that they gave, that they were kind of like role playing, they felt a little softball-y. And having been through a number of interviews myself and listening to the examples that were given in the CourseCareers interviews, my brain went, that wouldn't fly for me, because if I answered in that way, I feel like they're going to dig in a little bit more to me, because it had happened. And it didn't, obviously this isn't a one size fits all, but in some ways it just made it seem like it was going to be an easy interview process, and it wasn't. And that's where you guys stood out, because not only did you break it down a little bit further, but you were more in depth.
Credit to you. I think you really, you really took initiative. I think it's been a pleasure working with you. I think the cool thing about you is, I think your ability to learn really, really quickly and kind of understand some of these concepts. Obviously, granted, you already had some sort of exposure to another course, but again, like, credit to you and your hard work. I'm curious too, like we talked a little bit about like your specific situation with different courses, but could you walk us through like the job that you landed and, the success, just the process in general? I'd be curious to learn a little bit more about that.
Sure. So the position I landed was as a sales development representative, SDR, at a company called Chow Now. The purpose of the company is to help local restaurants thrive. So it's a SaaS company that does online integrations for restaurants to do both order pickup and delivery. They have some neat tricks that help a restaurant to, if they don't have delivery, to get access to delivery platforms like Uber and DoorDash, but they don't charge a commission, which is really interesting. So that's the position I landed. It's here in Los Angeles. It's 4 days in office and 1 day at home. So it's hybrid, which is amusing. And I do parentheses because, yeah, anyway. But the office is really nice, and my team is doing a really good job with our onboarding. It's really fun. We're all bouncing a lot of ideas off of each other and just learning the ropes in the product. And what was the other part of your question?
I was just asking about the process in general. Just kind of.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, I'd like to touch on that. So I applied to, I have a little notepad somewhere that has the lists of every company I applied to. Realistically, I applied to probably about 80 companies. And in total, including first, second, third, however many interviews, I did probably 40 interviews in total. It was quite a bit. And you just keep hearing no after no after no. And that was admittedly really challenging. One of the things I learned in CourseCareers is that getting the job is the job, because this is exactly what you're going to be doing with prospecting, but it felt different because I was selling myself. And so it's not like I'm selling a product, I'm selling Jacob. And so it's really hard to not personalize this rejection. You get all these intrusive thoughts, like, is it me? How can I suck? Like it, but as you and I were talking about, Chris, it's not always about you. There are times where there's a hiring freeze, or there's times where the recruiter that's recruiting you got laid off, which happened to me. I was going through, I went really far in the interview process. I went through all 4 interviews, and turns out most of the staff all got laid off. And that's why I didn't hear back for 3 weeks. So there are just all these things that can happen that you have no control over. And the lesson I learned was to just keep going. The methodology that I used, and we've touched on it in the live Q&As, I tried to bypass the applicant tracking system altogether. I felt like without a college degree and without prior experience that they would feel is relevant, I was just going to get screened out. So what I did was I would apply in the course. We made one master resume for an SDR BDR position. So I made one master resume that I was happy with, and I was using that to apply for jobs. And then what I would do is I would go onto LinkedIn and I would find out who the recruiter is and the hiring manager, and I would message them and just say something like, "Hey, I just applied for the position. I have experience selling $5,000 plus packages. I'm a tech sales bootcamp grad, and worth the chat," something like that. I have it written somewhere, but I would apply to companies, and most of the time I would at least hear something back from a recruiter, a hiring manager, something like that. And there were even a number of times where I got an auto rejection saying, "Hey, thank you for applying. We're currently exploring other candidates." And they actually moved me back into the interview process because I messaged the hiring manager. Ultimately, I blew it somewhere along the way. That's my default assumption. You never know, but it felt like I did. And so it was just really interesting to use this creative outreach to get interviews. And getting the interviews for me wasn't the hard part. It was progressing through the interviews. And so it's interesting when I see people say, "I've applied to 500 positions and I've had 2 interviews." And kind of alarm bells go off in my head. I'm like, okay, there's something wrong with your resume, or you aren't doing any creative outreach. It seems like a lot of people are just spraying and praying. And I think you have to take a little bit more of a targeted approach. It obviously takes more time, but it's totally worth it because you will get access to these people and nobody else is doing that. Reaching out to the hiring managers saying, "Hey, I want this thing. This is why I feel qualified. Let's talk." And that's what I did.
And I think, not to be understated too, it's even the example you gave of adding, "Hey, I'm selling $5,000 packages," your messaging as well. Even of the people that do message hiring managers, there's a whole nother, call it 80%, that aren't doing that well as well. So you're in very rarefied air when you're actually doing it at a very high level, like you mentioned. So credit to you again.
Well, the first thing I was doing was, I forget my first message, but it said something like, "Hey, it was just all these soft skills." It was like, "Hey, I'm good at communication. I have drive, whatever." And I wasn't getting a lot of feedback on that. And so I just took my current experience that I had selling $5,000 packages. And realistically, I had sold an $11,000 bed. So I wanted to put that in there, but I was like, no, 5,000's okay. And so just to generate interest, just, "Hey, this is me. This is what's interesting about me. I want your thing. Let's talk."
And Jacob, you mentioned kind of dealing with a lot of rejection, right? You had a lot of different processes going on, a lot of different interviews. I'm curious, how were you dealing with all that rejection? How were you dealing with that stuff mentally?
I do have one thought that I think is useful. And it ties along with what I was saying in regards to how many companies I applied to, the hours and hours that I spent during the interviews. And like I mentioned, it is tiring and it is dejecting to hear no and no over again. But what I realized, and I attribute a lot of this to getting my foot in the door here at Chow Now, is eventually I stopped caring what the outcome of the interview process was going to be. I knew what I was doing and why I was doing it. But during prior interviews, especially one of the earlier ones that I mentioned I blew it in, during the first 2 interviews, I was like, "Oh yeah, this is what," but then on the third one, when I realized it was the final one with the CEO of the company, I was so excited and I was just all over the place and it did not go well at all. So what I learned was, even if you want the thing, you have to not want it like that, because your brain will say, "I want this thing, don't mess up." And at least mine does. I get very excited and I try to curate all the words too much. So what I noticed was, when I stopped caring, to say I stopped caring, I hope people understand what I mean by that, because it's not like I don't care, I'm better than this. It's just, I have zero control of the outcome. And so to fret about it, it doesn't service me in any way. So I just went into the interview very calm, knowing that they could and possibly would say no. And all that I would do is I would just apply to another company, because eventually I was going to land a position. And so I really attribute detaching myself from the outcome as a huge success mark.
And it's interesting too. I think that's like, I like to look at sales as kind of self-development in disguise. It's like, as you kind of move along in your journey, and what you said too, it's like you kind of learn to do the job before you get the job. That's the unique thing about sales. But I think really the people who do, you know, get used to the process, they learn a lot of things about themselves, where it's like, hey, like I shouldn't be so attached to the outcome here. Like it's a numbers game at the end of the day too. And right now with the economy and everything else, there's a lot of things at play that you have no control over. So I think I really like what you said there about, like, you know, kind of just not caring, still doing your due diligence and everything else. But I think detaching yourself from the outcome and just kind of, you know, going with the flow, iterating, getting better, improving. I think you deserve a lot of credit for that. And also you showed up to almost every single one of our live Q&As. So I think, you know, you really, really like took this process under your wings and you committed to it. So again, huge kudos. And Eric, I'll throw it over to you.
Can I say one quick thing about why the rejection was so challenging for me?
Yeah.
The videos that I had seen of people going through CourseCareers and landing a high-paying tech sales job, which was obviously my goal. I want a sales job, but I also want a lot of money. And this is not a secret. So what I had seen were a few people who had completed CourseCareers in 10 days, 15 days, and 5 days after getting their certificate, they landed an SDR position at like Zoom Info or things of that nature. And so that was one of the things that was so challenging for me, because I had seen their progression and I also looked at their LinkedIn. And these are people who had been customer service people at like a burger shop, and then other people who had been dog walkers and things of that nature. And I was like, oh, that's kind of me. You know, I don't have a ton of formal workplace experience. I have my other side hustles and my own independent learning, but that's me. And when I saw that they had broke in so early at such reputable companies, I thought, oh, that's going to happen to me, obviously. And it didn't. And that's why it was so dejecting when a number of months went by. I started my CourseCareers journey in January, and I joined Tech Sales Ascension, I think, in April. And that was, it took me until the middle of July. So it took me over 6 months to land a tech sales job. And obviously I could have done things that made it a little bit faster, but I think I went into it with expectations of this will happen in 30 days. And when it didn't, it became extremely challenging.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's a good call out. I think also there's a lot of people on social media and YouTube who like what gets clicks and views is typically like doing something quicker and getting more elaborate results in a faster time frame. So I'm not going to say that, you know, people aren't always truthful, but I think
those things happened. Those people
Right.
landed positions at those companies, but for me, it definitely created false expectations.
Right, exactly. And that's the challenge, is like always kind of weighing yourself against other people. I think there's a nuance of that. It's kind of like, you know, if you're on Instagram all day long and you're looking at other people and you see like their best clips of their lives, it can be very like depressing, and it's created. Again, this is like a much deeper topic, but I think to some degree it happens in careers and in in the professional world as well, right? You see people jumping from one career to the next and in these crazy timeframes, and then you keep comparing yourselves to those people. So yeah, curious too, Jacob. Like if you had any tips for other people out there who are going through the same motion, you know, maybe who have invested in other courses, or even if you could go back in time, you know, tell your younger self, slightly younger self, to do something differently, like what would that be?
Advice I would give to my younger self is prepare more for the interviews, research the companies just a tad more. Some of the interviews I went into unprepared, not only because I didn't really know how to answer the questions I knew I was probably going to be asked, and I figured I could just wing it on the spot. This is not a way to do it. The preparation comes before, not during. And that's the advice I would give to my younger self. Also, even though I applied to a fair bit of companies, I think it was like 80, there were for sure days that I could have done more. And it's just all preparation. It's all follow through. And while I did obviously good enough, ultimately landing a position, I don't think it needed to take 6 months. I realistically think I could have done more in less time, but that was hard because I had expectations of getting it faster. And when it didn't, there were periods of time where I let the pipeline fall through. And that's really not something you want to do in a sales process, because what you don't do today doesn't affect you tomorrow. It affects you next week and next month. So that was where these interview processes take a long time. It's usually a week spacing between each interview, and there's usually 3 to 5 interviews. So if you wait 2 weeks to apply to companies, that position isn't coming for another like month and a half. And that's something I would advise to my younger self, is to just, even though you're dejected, more follow through. I can be a little bit give uppy at times, and this has just been a lifelong thing. I think that the first step is being aware of the thing. And obviously I didn't let it affect me enough to where I didn't follow through, because I think it's important to allow yourself time to recharge. But sometimes it's easy to give up completely and then forget about the idea for a little while. And I think it's more of just a focused, okay, give yourself a day, give yourself 2 days, but maybe not a week, that kind of thing.
Nice. No, I mean, really well said. And I think, yeah, it's so funny how your outlook can change. And honestly, I think you going through this obviously prepares you for the job as well. I mean, you're going to continue to face rejection, but again, like one analogy I use is like a great baseball player, like the best in the world, get paid to hit 3 times out of 10 that they go to, to swing the bat. And I think, you're definitely learning that. Really looking forward to seeing where your career goes, and really appreciate the time, Jacob. So thanks again. And yeah.
Thanks, Eric. It cannot be understated. I literally could not have done this without you guys. Not only did Tech Sales Ascension prepare me and give me the opportunity, for example, in the live Q&As that you mentioned, to discuss my ongoing journey and practice things with not only other students, but yourselves. I don't quite know how to put into words how much that prepared me, but that was a crucial element to my journey, was doing that. And I literally could not have done this without you guys. So thank you so much.
Thank you, man. Way to stick with it, and really excited for you.